Beholder's Tale. Book of the Dark. Tale of the Condemned. The world knew him as Kalen. To the few who had seen the full, terrible bloom of his power, he was whispered about as the Silent Storm or the Void Weaver. Yet in his heart he was merely Kalen, a man who sought only to unburden the weak and shield the helpless. His tale is not one of glory, but of the cruel irony of good intentions misunderstood, and of power feared above all else. It began subtly as all great tragedies do. Kalen was not born of noble lineage nor trained in the gilded halls of famed sword schools. His gifts were raw, primal, and terrifyingly innate. From his earliest days, a strange, shimmering aura sometimes emanated from him, a distortion in the very fabric of reality that caused nearby objects to hum with an unsettling resonance, or to briefly lose their vibrant hue. It was the ethereal distortion, or so the few scholars who dared to study such aberrant phenomena called it. When he was calm, it was a subtle tremor in the air. When he focused, when he willed it, it became a force to unravel stone and bend metal. He first used it to save his village. Not from monstrous beasts or marauding armies, but from a sudden, inexplicable rockslide that threatened to engulf the very homes of his kin. With a guttural cry, more instinctual than learned, Kalen had unleashed a wave of pure, localized force. The boulders, massive and swift, had not merely stopped. They had disintegrated into dust with a sound like tearing silk. The village was saved, the path cleared. But the villagers, huddled and trembling, did not cheer. Their eyes were wide, not with gratitude, but with a nascent, chilling fear. They saw not their savior, but the destructive potential he wielded. Despite this, Kalen pressed on. He was a wanderer, compelled by an inexplicable drive to right wrongs. He walked the wildlands, his imposing figure shrouded in dark, unassuming tunics, his face often obscured by shadow. Tales of his deeds began to spread, distorted and embellished with each retelling. There was the time he stood against the Iron Reavers, a band of mercenary thugs who had held the river town of Oakhaven in their grip for months. Kalen had arrived quietly, observing the brutality, the despair. When he moved, it was like a shadow stretching and consuming light. A single, focused wave of ethereal distortion had ripped through the very ground beneath the Reavers, not killing them but incapacitating them, shattering their morale and their weapons, leaving them writhing in the dust amidst splintered wood and cracked stone. Oakhaven was free. Yet, as the townsfolk emerged from their homes, they did so warily. They saw the scorch marks on the earth, the way the very air seemed to waver around him, the lingering scent of ozone. They thanked him with hesitant words and averted gazes, ushering their children indoors before he even turned to leave. He rescued orphan children from enslavement, his power manifesting as a silent, invisible force that snapped chains and buckled guards' armor, leaving them stunned but unharmed. He deflected the arrow of an assassin aiming for a kind-hearted merchant, not by blocking it with his hand, but by twisting the very air around it, sending it spiraling harmlessly into the earth. Each act of heroism, while undoubtedly effective, only served to broaden the chasm between Kalen and those he sought to protect. His touch could heal, but many flinched from it. His voice, though gentle, often seemed muffled or distorted to those listening, an unsettling side effect of the ethereal presence that clung to him. Whispers, like insidious vines, began to snake through the taverns and market squares of the realm. Have you heard of the Void Weaver? He saves, yes, but at what cost? He commands powers no mortal should possess. What if he turns on us? He is not bound by the pure light, nor the old magics. He is an aberration, a danger. The High Council, ever vigilant over the delicate balance of power within the kingdom of Eldoria, took note. Lord Valerius, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his intellect, saw an opportunity. He began to subtly fan the flames of fear, feeding the whispers, twisting Kalen's benevolent actions into tales of accidental devastation or uncontrolled fury. He shattered the ground beneath Oakhaven, not just the brigands, Valerius would remark, his voice grave. Imagine if he lost control within our city walls. Religious zealots from the Temple of the Pure Light, their dogma unyielding in its belief in a rigid, ordered world, declared Kalen anathema. He toys with the very fabric of creation, their high priestess thundered from her pulpit. He is touched by the chaotic energies of the void, a harbinger of ruin. They pointed to the unsettling visual effects of his power, the brief desaturation of colors, the shimmering air, the low, almost imperceptible hum that sometimes accompanied his more potent exertions, as irrefutable proof of his unholy nature. Propaganda, carefully crafted and widely disseminated, began to paint Kalen not as a protector, but as a dangerous, unstable force of nature, a potential calamity in human form. The true turning point, the event that sealed Kaelin's tragic fate, occurred during the siege of Ethelberg. The monstrous hordes of the Ghoul King, creatures of nightmare and pestilence, streamed from the northern wastes, their numbers seemingly endless. The kingdom's finest legions were overwhelmed, the walls breached, the city on the brink of falling. Kaelin, drawn by the desperate cries of the innocent, arrived as the final desperate stand was being made. He did not coordinate, he did not strategize. He simply acted. An observer, hidden amidst the crumbling ramparts, watched in horrified awe. Kaelin moved like a phantom, the air around him a palpable tremor. He unleashed his power not as a focused projectile, but as a sweeping, resonating wave. The Ghoul King's abominations, their grotesque forms distended and reeking, were caught in the wake of the ethereal distortion. They did not merely die, their very forms seemed to unmake themselves, flesh and bone vibrating apart, dissolving into motes of foul-smelling dust. The ground itself buckled and cracked where his power touched it, sending fissures through the city's ancient paving stones. The Ghoul King, a towering terror of reanimated flesh, met Kaelin head-on. The clash was not one of steel but of raw power against dark magic. A blinding flash, a deafening roar that seemed to vibrate in the very teeth, and then silence. Ethereal distortion had met corrupted necromancy, and the Ghoul King was no more, leaving behind only an acrid smell and a vast, smoking crater. Ethelberg was saved. The last of the Ghoul King's forces, leaderless and broken, fled into the night. But the victory was silent, hollow. The surviving soldiers, the terrified citizens, they did not rejoice. They stood amidst the devastation, staring at the scarred earth, the lingering distortions in the air, the unholy speed and ferocity with which Kaelin had dispatched the threat. They had seen a force beyond their comprehension, beyond their control. A protector, yes, but one so powerful, so alien, that he presented a greater perceived threat than the monsters they had just faced. Lord Valerius, ever watchful, seized the moment. "Look upon this," he proclaimed to the High Council and the populace. "He saved us, yes, but what unleashed such power? What monstrous force lies within him? He unmade creatures, shattered the very earth. This is not the work of a man but of a plague, a curse. He is too dangerous to live, too unpredictable to stand amongst us." The Temple of the Pure Light echoed his words, declaring the battle itself a blasphemous act, proof of Kaelin's dark communion. Within hours, warrants were issued. Kaelin was declared an enemy of the realm, a void scourge, a ravager of reality, wanted dead for unspeakable crimes against humanity and the natural order. The hunt began. Kaelin, weary and bewildered, did not resist the initial attempts to apprehend him. He simply vanished. He understood, with a crushing despair, that their fear was now absolute. For weeks, he was a ghost, traversing the shadowed paths he had once cleared of bandits and monsters. He was pursued by the king's guard, by zealous temple knights, and even by desperate villagers armed with pitchforks, driven by terror and the king's bounty. He could have scattered them, rendered them helpless with a flick of his wrist. But he did not. He had sworn to protect them, and even in their blindness, they were still the people he had fought for. He would deflect their blows, disarm them, incapacitate them with the barest whisper of his power, a sudden disorientation, a chilling of the blood, a momentary paralysis, but he would not kill. His face, when seen, was a mask of sorrow, not rage. He sought brief refuge in the old, forgotten places, ruined castles, ancient forests. But even there, his presence was unnerving. Animals fled, plants withered slightly at his touch, a faint dissonance clung to him. He was alone, utterly and irrevocably. His final confrontation came in the Whisperwood, a dense, ancient forest known for its treacherous bogs and intertwined roots. A massive contingent had cornered him, a full company of the king's elite soldiers, supplemented by a dozen battle-hardened temple knights, and at their head, Lord Valerius himself, protected by a cadre of court mages. They had laid a cunning trap, using enchanted nets and silencing spells, hoping to nullify his unique power. The observer watched from the canopy, an unseen witness to the tragic ballet. Kaelin was surrounded, exhausted, his face etched with a profound weariness. He stood his ground, not defiant, but resolute. When the first enchanted net flew, he could have torn it to shreds, but instead he simply let it settle around him, allowing only enough ethereal distortion to prevent it from constricting fully. When the soldiers charged, swords drawn, he parried their blows not with a weapon, but with subtle shifts in the air that deflected their blades away from him, leaving them off balance. He would not harm them. This was his fatal flaw, his ultimate act of self-sacrifice. The court mages, sensing his restraint, saw their opportunity. They unleashed binding spells, arcs of pure arcane energy, designed not to kill but to imprison something as volatile as Kalen. He could have unleashed his full power, vaporized the mages and the soldiers alike, torn through the forest itself to escape. But he saw the fear in their eyes, the genuine belief that they were fighting a monster. He remembered the children of Oakhaven, the desperate pleas of Ethelberg. He would not become the very thing they feared. He took the full brunt of the magical assault, a raw, writhing ball of pure energy. His form flickered, the air around him screaming with unleashed, chaotic power that he stubbornly held back from fully manifesting. He fought against the spells with sheer will, but his physical body, already weakened by weeks of flight and starvation, could not withstand the combined assault and his own internal struggle to contain his immense strength. Then came the final blow, not from spell or sword, but from the shadow of Lord Valerius. While Kalen was momentarily overwhelmed, a temple knight, guided by Valerius's silent nod, plunged a consecrated blade, shimmering with holy light, deep into Kalen's chest. There was no explosion of power, no final, desperate surge. Just a shudder that rippled through the whisperwood, a final, fading hum that vibrated the leaves and the very ground. Kalen's eyes, wide with a profound sadness, found no single point, but seemed to encompass all the world. He sank to his knees, still deflecting stray blows with the last vestiges of his strength, protecting his attackers even in his death throes. And then he crumpled. The ethereal distortion around him dissipated, the air settling as if a great, silent scream had finally died. His corpse was afforded no dignity. It was dragged from the whisperwood, bound and shackled as if it could still rise and wreak havoc. The journey back to the capital was a morbid procession. In the grand square of Eldoria, where holidays were celebrated and justice was dispensed, Kalen's body was hoisted high, strung up like a common criminal. His face, once obscured by shadow, was now exposed, marked and defaced with symbols of corruption, glyphs of black magic, brands of demonic possession. Lord Valerius stood before the gathered populace, his voice booming. Behold the void scourge, the ravager of reality. He who brought down the Ghoul King not with courage but with dark, unnatural power. He who plotted against the crown, who sought to unmake our very world. He listed fabricated crimes, the slaughter of innocents, the defilement of sacred sites, the summoning of infernal beings. Each accusation was met with cheers and relieved sighs from the crowd, their fear transformed into a triumphant certainty that they had been saved from a great evil. The Temple of the Pure Light conducted a grand purification ritual over the very ground where Kalen had been displayed, cleansing the city of his blight. Children, once warned of the Ghoul King, were now told tales of the silent storm, a monster who would rip the very essence from their souls if they misbehaved. His name became a curse, a cautionary tale. The observer remained unseen, long after the crowds dispersed, long after the moon rose high over the city. The wind stirred, carrying the faint, lingering scent of ozone from the whisperwood. Kalen, the man who only wished to help, to defend, lay exposed, stripped of his honor, his intentions twisted into villainy. His terrifying power had been his shield, then his cage and ultimately his tomb. The darkness that truly festered was not within Kalen, but within the hearts of those who feared what they could not control, and celebrated the destruction of true, albeit inconvenient, good. And the world, believing itself safe, marched on, oblivious to the silent, profound injustice it had wrought. End of the tale of the condemned. To fear the known and condemn it is the nature of any mortal.